Opioid addiction is a severe epidemic in the US, and with COVID-19, it is only getting worse. However, is going after the seller and locking up the user really the best way of stopping it?
A young man sits down in front of a computer. He logs in using a Tor browser to a darknet marketplace. There, within 5 minutes or so, he finds and orders, say, 10 grams or so of carfentanil or a similarly dangerous synthetic opioid for $5,000 or so, paid for in Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency. A laboratory in China fulfills the order, and through the standard smuggling routes, it goes directly to this young man's front door. Now think about that for a second. For about 5 minutes of work and $5,000, this young man has ordered approximately 500,000 lethal doses of narcotics that went directly to his home.
With just about anyone being able to discreetly order opioids, such as fentanyl, directly to their door, regulating the illegal trafficking and distribution of these opioids becomes a nightmare for the government. But before we get more into that, let's take a look at how this epidemic started in the first place.
Are under arrest for unlawful possession of needles and unlawful possession of heroin.
Following World War II, hard drug use, particularly among young people, was on the upswing. Public reaction surged, resulting in more stringent controls, stiffer penalties. The 1956 Narcotic Control Act spelled out the most severe and inflexible set of laws ever put on the federal books. Penalties for possession were only slightly less than those for selling. Probation was possible only on a first offense possession charge. The sentence was 2 to 10 years. Second and third offenses and selling in any quantity, even soft drugs such as marijuana, brought terms up to 40 years with no chance for probation or parole.
The reality is that it's a chronic disease. We use those words, but we don't actually put the muscle behind that. And what I mean is we talk about diabetes as a chronic disease or high blood pressure as a chronic disease. And when you have a chronic disease, it means that you're going to have good times and bad times. And as doctors and nurse practitioners, we make sure that when somebody hits a rough patch, we help them. We figure out what's the reason for that rough patch, and we work through that. For the longest time in addiction, when somebody hits a rough patch, they've been thrown out of care. And once they get better on their own, we're then willing to try to help them again. And that's exactly the wrong approach.
But what can be done in order to put an end to this crisis? To find out, we interviewed Sarah Edwards, the manager at the Hope Recovery Center.
I think we need to readdress through legislation the criminalization of drug possession. So let's say someone is busted and they have X amount of pills or X amount of heroin on them, cocaine, whatever it may be, and then they're charged with a felony and thrown in jail. They're incarcerated, right? And that gives someone a limited opportunity to rehabilitate themselves or work on themselves. And you get thrown into that system, and the rates of recidivism, re-entering the prison system is very real. And it's counterproductive to the recovery process or the process of healing and getting better, right? So once you're slapped with a felony, that affects your opportunities for housing, education, employment, right? So how is someone supposed to get back up on their feet and be a productive member of society if they have this felony that kind of lingers over their head for a simple possession charge? When in reality, it's not harming the public on a large scale. If anything, it's only inward harm, right? The person just has substances that they are using because of an addiction. So I think the personal possession charge needs to be re-examined. And there was some legislation we were working on before COVID hit of reclassifying personal drug possession into a misdemeanor rather than a felony. However, I think it should just be wiped away completely.
In 2017, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, an estimated 1.7 million people in the United States suffered from an opioid-related substance disorders. And according to this graph from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, approximately 47,000 of which died as a result in the same year. In order for the nation to heal from this crisis, the President and new Congress needs to loosen punishments for drug possession and use in order to give those affected by it a better chance for rehabilitation and recovery. In addition to loosening restrictions on drugs, the new administration needs to allocate more funding in order to support all of the help and prevention centers that will take the place of prisons. President Joe Biden's administration has promised $125 billion in federal investments to put an end to the opioid epidemic. Though this is definitely a step in the right direction, in order to put a true end to the crisis, a lot more money and effort is going to be needed. It is imperative that this issue is addressed by the President and new Congress as soon as possible in order to save the lives of countless Americans.